Now my porch roof system has the posts in the front, those 6x6 posts, but then it's actually going to have a hidden post in my existing wall framing of the house to tie it back to the rest of the house. So what I've done is I had to cut back the sheathing, the OSB that I had installed previously, just to a point wide enough where I could get a configuration of king and jack studs placed in the wall cavity. So these are both 2x4 jacks in the center, and then 2x4 kings on the outside. So what that'll do is that'll create a cavity where I can get the tail end of my roof beam to install in the wall, and that gives me a point where the load transfer can come down to where the foundation is down below. Kind of a good way of bearing the weight of the roof, the porch roof structure, on something other than, you know, something just scabbed to the face of the sheathing. I cut this post pocket, I'll call it, or the beam pocket, at the same level as where my soffit is. So I've cut back the soffit to the new level where I'm going to take it, and that's the same level where the 2x6 framing of my fascia exists already. So the intent of doing that is so that when my beam for the roof comes out and gets in contact with those 6x6 posts, it's at the same level such that my fascia can come around and wrap up into it. And that'll be the same case with my gutter system, is that the gutter will just make a right angle turn and then follow the porch roof as well. I'll give you a quick zoom in of what I'm doing here with one of the pockets in the wall. As I mentioned, this is kind of a stud construction I've got in here. I've got a couple of king studs and then a pair of jack studs. And what the intent is that my roof beam for the porch is going to come into this cavity and bear weight down on the jack studs. This is a 6 3/4 inch cavity. I didn't want to cut into the top plates. My beam is 7 inches though in width or thickness, or I'll call it height, 7 inches in height. So I'm going to have to kind of shiv off a 1/4 inch on this back side where the 3.5 inches go into the wall pocket. What I did though is I have a plumb line running down to my deck where I've got the 1 inch inset down there that aligns with my 6x6 post. I bring a line up the wall, measured out where the pocket needs to be. And now what I'm doing is I need to figure out where on my soffit I'm going to cut so that I can project this beam out towards the front of the porch. What I did is I set up a square against my OSB here, lined it up with this corner here, and then drew it out to where I found my line on the face of this soffit. And I'm giving myself another 1/8 of an inch or so of kind of leeway so that when I get my beam set up, I'm not fighting myself. I did that on both sides, so my beam's going to be 3.5 inches wide. So I gave myself an 1/8 on that and 1/8 on this. So I've got 3 1/4 inch wide cut that I'll be making. And then do a plumb line going up. And then I need to see where 7 inches actually hits my roof line. And that's about 4 inches up the peak, or towards the peak. So what I'll be doing is I'll be cutting like this, up and over and down, and taking out this segment here so that I can get a beam from my pocket over to the 6x6 posts. So I know I commented on this earlier, but where the roof beam comes out of the house, I want that to wrap seamlessly in with my existing fascia, existing gutter system. So I'm actually going to cut the gutter at the outside of the beam. I know that's going to be wider or enough extra than what I need, because by the time I have a porch beam and soffits on the porch, I'll be cutting back the gutter even further. But for now, I'm going to cut it flush with where my beam sits so that I can get it up and out of the way. Well, we've gone through a handful of costume changes today. Started off kind of cool and almost sprinkling, and now it's getting fairly warm. I got fried last weekend doing the deck, so I thought I'd try to keep a hat on today. We got the gutter cut out. We got some of the fascia trimmed back just so I can have a kind of clean cut. I'm going to come in here with my Sawzall and knock out that corner section that I had showed you earlier. We'll see if we can do this without making too much of a mess. It seems like it's getting windier today. So I've already got one post set. You had seen I rounded off the edges of these. That's kind of a finishing touch I like to do, especially on this deck board, just because it's not unlike interior framing or something where you have layers of drywall and mud and everything. You know, this is the finished surface, so we'll be staining these, but I wanted to round over the edges before getting them installed. I'm just doing a final check on the plumb of this post. It's got a little bit of a bow to it, kind of arcing this way, so I'm going to take it off this side. And that shows as plumb. So what I'm going to do is now use a laser measure. I'm just going to get the distance between the inside of my beam pocket to where it needs to attach over there. (9'11" and 15/16", so right at 10 foot. And so I'm going to cut. I'm essentially doing a built-in-place beam setup where I've got, it's going to be 7 inches total, but I'm using 2x4s and 2x6s ripped at 4 inches, and I'm going to kind of do a layered approach with alternating layers. I'm describing that poorly, but I think you'll see it when I'm all done with it. And the reason I chose a 7-inch beam, not only would the 2x6s alone be good enough for this kind of roof loading, but I wanted a 7-inch beam so that it kind of matches some of the other features of the house. I wanted aesthetically it to look the same once I get it wrapped in the cement siding. So I'm going to cut this bottom plate of this beam. It should drop in place. I've already ensured that the post is plumb, and then that'll be the bottom plate of my beam kind of set up on these 3 sections, and then I'll build up from there. It fits nice and snug in there. On this side of the wall where it's going into my 2x4s, I'm using some of the GRK kind of structural screws. If I can find my bit for them. And those obviously won't be the only screws going into this structure as I add in my vertical 2x6s and things. Essentially what we're doing is we're kind of creating a boxed beam, kind of like what you'd have on a truck or something, but without the width or the heaviness of like a full 2x8 or something, or 4x8 ripped down. I'm not even sure if they make a 4x8. Big beam ripped down. And then on this side, because we're going into some of the green treated, which seems to be a little softer until it cures, I've got some of these 6-inch kind of Spax screws. And that's really working well to suck things down and get it flush. So I realize as I'm up there on top of the post, it's hard to kind of describe what I mean by doing this overlapped beam structure. If we pretend that this is one of the posts on the corner of the porch, the first piece that I put in already was like this. This is what I'm calling my joist tie. So this spans the width of the porch going across both of those posts. The next beam that I put in, so this guy's here, the next beam I put in was the bottom plate of my roof beam. So that went like this way. So those tie the 6x6 posts in position. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to be staggering 6x6 stacked vertically on top of that like this. We'll have one going back to the roof or to the original house. We'll have another coming in this way, and then we'll space out some more like that so we get our 3.5 inch width across. And then my top plate for these beams will be the opposite of the bottom plate. So whereas my bottom plate was like this, my top plate's actually going to be further forward on my roof beam and staggered back on my rim or my joist tie. So I'm pretty pleased with this approach. Like I said, it gives you the right dimension for the beam that I'm interested in. And it's a pretty strong way of doing it, especially considering you've got structural screws coming in from both corners, kind of sucking the corner of these wood members together. You've got your top and bottom plate sucking the sides of the 2x6s together. So that's the approach we're doing. I thought it'd just be easier to quick show it out down here versus up there where it's windy and I'm balancing on the top of a ladder. So this is what the composite beam structure looks like as it's all put together. This is actually a few days later. We got a lot of wind and rain that following afternoon, and I didn't get things wrapped up as quickly as I wanted to. In the previous segment, I was saying that I was going to use some 4-inch boards, 2x6s ripped to 4 inches. I ended up going with a full 2x8 though, after I kind of recalculated some of the snow loads and things. And so what I've actually got is a 10 1/4 overall height beam, composite beam, constructed of 2x4 on the top and bottom, and 2x8s, two 2x8s running parallel, kind of laminated together with a sheet of plywood between. And so that gives me a very strong structure, and it goes together in the corners kind of as I described, with overlapping corners, so that everything tied to the post is tied to the house and everything's very rigid. What I'm doing now is I'm going to start doing my rafter layouts. You know, I had to actually adjust some of my rafter dimensions because of the increased height of my beam. And that's because I want the tails of my rafter to sit flush across the bottom so that everything with the soffits and the original home all tie together pretty nicely. So my ridge beam here is actually a 2x10, and that's so that the top ends of my rafter plates, as they come in, they're fully supported along there. What I'll end up doing is toenail from the opposite side into it, kind of doing, 3 or 4 into it from the opposite side of the ridge beam. What I like to do, just like I did with the beam on the decking, is it's always helpful to have all your marks pre-established, everything space 16 on centers for my rafters, which are a 2x8. And that's just because, as you're working alone, you want to kind of just get it up there and get things aligned. I'll actually use the first 16 mark here with the first set of rafters that I have set up. And that's so that I can get those secured and then pull the ridge beam into place to get that front set of rafters plumb. And then I can support the back end of the rafter to get the back end of this ridge beam at the house to see and get it kind of horizontal and running plumb as well. So that's the plan here. Now this may seem a little cheesy, but since I have to cut about 24 of these rafters, at least 20 of them full length, and then I'll have to taper them back as they get into the original roof line. But since I have to cut so many of them by hand, what I'm going to do is I actually created some little jigs on my 3D printer with the dimensions of my bird's mouth, as well as my angled cuts for my 812 pitch roof. Pretty simple design. I mean, it only takes a couple minutes to model something like this, but having it printed out allows me to quick scribe a line and cut it rather than having to use my speed square and kind of get things lined up. Now I know the speed square works just as well, but sometimes it's nice having a second way of double checking yourself. set, a little bit of an iterative process, just because what I'm doing is trying to keep my front wall plumb while I scoot my ridge beam back and forth to drive it that way. I had to set it at the right height off of my beam on the left-hand side, and then went back and forth between the left and right-hand sides to get the ridge beam level and set. But that's what it should look like when it's all done. It's already got the 16 on center marked on there. So now all I have to do is cut my rafters and lay them in place. Well, guys, that's a wrap for today. It's going to start raining here soon. I got things kind of buttoned up outside, and we'll look forward to the next sunny day so we continue framing. I think our next video will probably be putting up the rafters, probably the purlins, maybe getting some of the fascia kind of subframing and box ends put in. Anyways, if you guys are enjoying this content, if it's entertaining or maybe you're learning something, feel free to give us a thumbs up and subscribe. It costs nothing to do it. I know I feel a little petty asking for it, but it lets me know if the content's worth doing. So anyways, that's it, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.